Why don't we call the meeting to order? This is the third session of the public hearing with respect to the 40B application for 131 Elliott Street. The first hearing, when we opened, was on July 24th. We continued that hearing until September 30th. We continued it again to tonight, November 6th. My name is Brian Hurley. I'm acting as the chairman of the board for purposes of this application. On my right is Mr. Frank O'Brien. To my left is Mr. Ted Daber, and the three of us constitute the Board of Appeals with respect to this 40B application. Since we last met, we've received a number of additional materials. I must confess that I haven't had the opportunity to read them all. Some of them I just got today. But I sort of have the gist of what they say, and I'm sure probably Frank and Ted have had a better opportunity to do it than I have. But let me just list them so we know what's here, and if anyone thinks I've missed anything or they thought they submitted something and I haven't listed it, then please tell us. The first item that we received was a letter from Richard Wells, the Chief of Police, dated October 28, 2014. I see the Chief is here tonight, and I assume he's planning to say, is he here? I'm sorry.
He will be,
Not yet.
but he's not here yet.
Okay, all right. I'm sure he'll explain his letter a bit. We received a technical memorandum from Gill & Associates dated October 28th, 2014. We received a letter, I actually received it today, but it's dated October 31st, 2014, a letter from Joseph Lynch, the Director of Public Works, a letter dated November 5th, 2014 from Gill & Associates, which is styled as a revised traffic signal warrant evaluation. And then we have a letter from Connolly Associates dated November 5th, 2014, commenting on revised traffic information, as well as, I believe, the traffic signal warrant evaluation of Gill & Associates. So those are the written materials that we received so far. I know there's a number of people here tonight, I'm told, that wish to testify. Peter, I'll like to have your input on this, but my inclination would be to have those people say what they have to say this evening, unless you want to do it differently.
No, I certainly expect them to have an opportunity to speak. I thought that we might, since we've already addressed it, and you do have your peer review traffic consultants, and we have Mr. Gillen, that we might go over those comments first, but it's certainly your pleasure if you
Yeah, I would like to hear from both the Department of Public Works and the Police Department. Both commented on the signalization issue, which seems to be becoming sort of a linchpin issue on the case. I'd like to hear from them, and maybe then Mr. Gillen can respond to what they have to say.
By the way, of the things that you listed, I think the only one that I was not aware of and do not have a copy of, actually two. The first is the DPW director's letter, so if somebody has a copy or multiple copies, I'd appreciate it. And likewise, although I presume that Jack Gillen and Jennifer Conley have been in touch, but I don't have a copy of your November 5th letter.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Hurley.
Okay, so what I'm going to do then is have, I have to introduce the estimable Kathleen O'Donnell, who's here tonight, representing, I guess, the Board of Selectmen in connection with this application. Her experience and expertise is legion in this field, and we welcome her tonight. And so I'll turn it over to you to do what it is that you would like to do.
Actually, thank you very much. But just to repeat, my name is Kathleen O'Donnell, and I've been asked by the Board of Selectmen to assist with the town's review of this application, and also to assist the department heads in their submissions to the board as a result of their reviews of the project application. And so what I've done is try to coordinate these the responses. I do have some department heads here tonight, as you've already mentioned, the police chief, but I have the fire chief, the assistant DPW director, and we expected the building commissioner as well.
He will be here.
You'll be here. So those four gentlemen would be talking about the results of their review, and then we do have, I noticed that you didn't have on your list the letter from the fire department. You could have fire chief. Go ahead, Peter. I have some additional copies as well. And so, what I'd like to do is just sort of, as I said, these department heads have busy schedules. I thank you for the opportunity for us to go first before Mr. Freeman and the discussion of the response on the traffic studies, to be able to have the fire chief and the DPW and the building inspector talk about their results, their review at first, before we get into all of that. So, all that being said, I'd like to have the fire chief discuss his
Great.
review and his comments on the project.
We have a couple of issues. All of them go toward the accessibility of the structure. The first would be the side of the building that runs along the tracks. Because of the overhead cables, we'd have zero ability to get any fire apparatus down along that side of the building. Also, with the way those are gridded off, we would have no ability to get ground ladders in. So having actually no access to any kind of laddering along that side. So that's a significant problem for us. Also, and I worked in conjunction with the building inspector on this, along the easterly and northerly elevations along the town-owned parcel, as proposed, would allow for the possibility of a windowless commercial building of 45 feet in height to be built within 5 feet of this structure on the parcel that is currently owned by the town. This positioning on this wall or exposure here would prevent us from doing any kind of operations along this exposure. So basically, the combination of the two takes access to 50% of that building away from us.
Okay. Ted or Frank, do you have any questions of the fire chief?
Chief, as I understand it, this building is sprinklered? Or
The
would be
building would be
sprinkled?
sprinkled, yes.
Could you discuss for us, I know that you have a lot of expertise in sprinkler-related issues. Could you, does that assuage any of your concerns?
No, it doesn't. I mean, buildings are sprinklered, it does create a safer environment, but it doesn't negate the need for us to respond. And, you know, any structure that we have to deal with, we have to look at, you know, what worst case would be. And, you know, any kind of rescue work, ventilation work, without the ability to ladder severely hampers us. If you have a fire in a sprinklered building, you get a condition that's called cold smoke. That actually keeps the smoke down at lower levels. So that's going to hinder people, you know, even if the fire doesn't extend, they're going to have a smoke and a visibility problem. So the possibility of rescue work is very real, regardless of whether it's sprinkled or not.
Chief, what's the solution to the overhead electric cables? I mean, what do you do?
Move the, you know, to move that wall, you know, away from the tracks. As it currently sits, it's right on the tracks. And to me, also lower it to 3 stories.
How would that help with the cables? I'm not sure I understand.
Okay, if we had to throw a ground ladder, say, here, you know, as it sits right on the tracks, I can't get a ladder up in between those cables. You move it in, now I'm putting a ladder in here. Doesn't help with the apparatus, but it would help with ground laddering.
Sometimes people forget that actually ladders have to tip towards a building. So it's not enough just to get the truck in, you have to have room to tip the ladder to touch the building.
Well, we're not even talking about getting a ladder, getting a ladder truck down those tracks. We're talking about ground ladders, aren't we?
We're talking about both. We're not going to get a vehicle down there. I know you're not going to get a ladder truck down there at all, and I doubt you'd get an engine down there. I didn't put a tape measure on it, but...
But that would be true no matter what you build on there, isn't that right?
Yes.
Unless you put the cables in. So,
Right.
I mean, I know just sort of from rumor that there's been other suggested proposals for this site, and they didn't come to fruition, but wouldn't they all have faced the same problem?
To my knowledge, this is, and I haven't seen the other plans, but as you can see, this is being built right along the track line. And from what I understand, it's the 40B that allows infringement of lot lines. And it's, and like I say, it's that hinders any kind of access along that stretch. You know, regardless of what goes in there, you're correct, we're not gonna get a truck in there. But with the setbacks, we can at least get ground ladders. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that there's also height restrictions if it's not 40B, again, which, you know, lowers what we have to deal with in there.
So if you can get ladders in there but not trucks, you would consider that to be not an unacceptable life safety hazard?
Right, I mean, at least it gives us, you know, it's not optimum, but it's not, you know, not worst case. We can do some interventions that way.
The second part of your concern is the windowless structure on the, can I ask you just to move back? The windowless structure on the right?
If the, and this, it would help if the building inspector was here, but my understanding from him is that if that section of property that the town owns is sold and a commercial structure is built, that they could go 45 feet in height, and being a commercial occupancy, that there'd be no window. The windows actually really don't matter. It's the 5 feet from the lot line that is the issue. I can't do anything with that.
How many feet do you need?
At least 20.
So our concern is that we're not really sure, I mean, we don't have an actual field survey of this property. There are plans that have been submitted, but none of them have the square footage. And then none of them are signed, you know, surveys. But then there's a discrepancy all along about what's shown on the town's records as the square footage of this site and what has been put on the application. But from what we can tell from looking at the plans is that the building is right up against all the property lines. So there really isn't any sort of setback at all for that sort of safety concern that the fire chief has.
But that concern only exists if you build a 45-foot story building on the other parcel.
Well, no, not necessarily. If
Yeah.
you build to the lot line, if you know, a commercial structure goes in there and you have a 5-foot gap, you really prevent me from doing any kind of firefighting work from that side of the building.
So you were essentially saying that if one building goes, both of them are gonna go? With that if that 5-foot gap is
No, I'm
in
not.
place?
It's a distinct possibility, but I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I can't perform any kind of firefighting function from that side of the structure with only 5 feet between the two buildings.
But again, it posits that that site is developed somehow, the
Yeah.
town parcel. So if this just got a permit and nothing happened on that site, you wouldn't have that problem.
But how do we, that question lays out there for good then, because that possibility always exists.
Sure, but then that's the town's problem, isn't it? They can just choose not to develop it.
Well, no, I don't believe so. I mean, I think the town has a right to sell that land, and it's commercial property that they could build what's the property is zoned for. I think we have to adjust here to accommodate that possibility.
And how would we adjust? What would we do?
Again, setback.
So all of this, the net result of all of this is that we would have a reduced proposal?
Yes.
Reduced number of units, reduced height, reduced footprint?
Exactly.
Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Chief, have you just discussed, would you, just for the edification of the board, just discuss the current condition of the property, whether you have any firefighting concerns, life safety concerns with the building, the property as it exists now?
Oh, yeah. It's a red X building, which
What's
means
that mean?
no interior operations.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ted, do you have any questions?
No more right now, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
You don't see the building inspector? Okay. Did you want to, we'll wait for the.
Whenever you're ready, Kathleen.
Okay.
I have to,
Oh, Jeff,
Sorry, I'm late.
that's all right.
Mr.
You know,
Pryor.
you're right on time.
Seat's right there.
Come on up. Actually, we're going to have you come next and talk about your letter to the board, which I don't, does the board mentioning, haven't gotten a copy of that letter?
I don't think I've seen it.
Did you get a letter from Inspectional Services?
I don't think so.
Okay. I have some more copies as well.
Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry?
Just for the record, it's pretty customary that the applicant or his attorney would get copies of these items before the hearing, and that wasn't done, but thank you very much for letting me say that.
We haven't, we're in the same boat, Peter. We haven't seen it either, so.
Thank you.
Thank
Why don't we take a moment and just maybe read it? I should note that my grandson asked me not to wear these glasses tonight because he thinks I look ridiculous in them on TV, but, but I can't read anything, so I beg your indulgence on this.
Can I just say that it's sort of sad
your
if your
grandson's
grandson is
to
actually
indulge.
watching this on television? Unless you're paying him to watch it, get the numbers up.
Okay. Have you had a chance to read it? Go ahead. We've read it, Mr. Prondak.
Yeah.
Okay, essentially, my comments are, I guess you would say in concert with the fire chiefs. Basically, my areas of concern are the height of the building and the proximity to the T-tracks and the town-owned parcel of land. Should the building be built to this height, it would make it difficult along the T-tracks for emergency access for fire departments and rescue vehicles. Given the nature of the building, a residential use where you would likely have units along the track that could potentially need direct access by fire services. And the other portion is along the, what would be almost like an alleyway on the southerly side
Yeah.
of the building, the portions of the building adjacent to the town-owned parcel, should another building get built on the town-owned land, that could potentially go right up to the lot line. That would leave an alleyway of about 5 feet, and that could derogate from the ability of fire services to access that portion of the building. It would also cut down on the attractiveness of those units if you know, they were originally built with a nice view overlooking the Neponset River, but then a building all of a sudden went up in front of them. So that may change the character of the units on that side. And then there's one other point, one final point, is that there is some concern as to the actual square footage of the lots, and there may be some discrepancies in there, and we would like to see that certified by the surveyor of record. And that's
Yeah.
essentially my comments.
Ted?
Not at this time, thanks.
This is the second time in 10 minutes that I've heard the phrase, there's a discrepancy in the square footage plot. That there needs to be a record land survey done here. Counselor, connect the dots for me. Why is this an issue now?
Well, we're not the ones who filled out the application, but the application indicates, I believe, that there's 35,000 square feet for this parcel. Actually, it says, I think, even more in the application, higher number in the application. But when I did the research on the title, I found, 2 lien certificates that were recorded at the time they purchased, which indicate that the square footage is 34,964 square feet. Where this actually gets to be a problem is when you're figuring out how the parking works, if the lot size isn't exactly right. And we tried to find on all the plans that I'd received, anything that was signed off by a surveyor, as to what the dimensions of the lot were, any plan that said what the square footage was, and it was missing. It seems sort of odd.
You're taking issue with whatever the numbers may be for the square footage of the lot, but it's really a stalking horse for concerns about the size of the parking?
Well, I don't know. I think it's just, it's tough if you say that you have a lot that's 35, whatever your square footage is, and it turns out it's smaller, then you're trying to jam even a bigger project into a smaller area. So it does affect the sort of lot coverage issue. It does go to the question about how close the building is to all the lot lines, which, as I said, was an issue with the fire chief and also with the building inspector.
I think the working assumption from the start of this has been the developer is seeking a project that is the maximum size possible and is going right up to the lot lines. Would you agree that's true?
That is true.
Would you also suggest, are some of your other concerns about square footage also related to some of the stormwater management issues here?
Not the square footage issue. I don't think that relates to a stormwater issue. The stormwater issue is basically, I don't think we know enough about what they have. That's the DBW's discussion. But I believe that our question is that we don't think there's been assumptions made about where the stormwater is going and also what it connects to, and nobody seems to have been able to say, talk to the DPW about what their records indicate and where the stormwater is actually going. I don't think that stormwater issue is affected by the lot size. I don't think it's that much of a the discrepancy doesn't cause a change in the stormwater. I think our major issue with the stormwater is we don't know where it's all going. Whether it's 1,000 square feet or 2,000 square feet, we still don't know where the stormwater is actually going.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, a couple more questions. Joe, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked the fire chief. Presumably, this is a sprinkler building. Is there any amount of additional sprinkler capacity, or is there anything that could be added to this building which would assuage your accessibility concerns?
No, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's the intention to build this as a wood frame building. Wood frame buildings are least desirable in congested areas. However, the size of this building, I believe they have the right to build it as a wood frame building. Wood frame buildings, however, sprinkler systems are designed to put out the fire the minute it starts. If there is a failure in one sprinkler head, or if there is a misplacing of one sprinkler head, the potential for that fire to overtake the rest of the sprinkler system is very real. And in a wood frame building, that's a setup for catastrophe.
Has the town had experience with any other buildings similar in height near the trolley tracks that may have caused concern to the building department about accessibility?
As I think about the most recent buildings that have been built, I really don't have that concern because they seem to have access on all sides, better access. The biggest problem with access on the T side is the overhead line. And as explained to me by the chief, the power can be cut to that very quickly, but the line itself is still in the way of the equipment.
Wouldn't the fire department have the same level of accessibility concerns at, I forget what it's called, but that building down where the old Hood plant was, the storage area, that that warehouse burned down, but aren't there accessibility issues there now? How is that different from the accessibility concerns here, or is it?
It's a steel building.
Expand upon that.
Substantially bigger, but much less susceptible to fire.
Okay.
And much-
It also has setback from the tracks. If you're thinking of the wharf, the buildings on the wharf,
Yeah.
yeah, they're set back from the tracks.
Would you agree with the chief that the answer to some of the accessibility issues is to reduce the size of the building?
I would agree with that.
And it's, I see from your letter, you have some concerns that some of the measurements regarding the height of the building may not be accurate?
Not that they're not accurate, just that typically in Milton, we look at heights of buildings from average grades. And that average grade hasn't been specified on any of the plans. However, it is simple enough to take an average, and you'd be pretty close if the back of the lot is at 100 feet and the front of the lot is at 0, then the average is going to be right around 50. So I think I made some assumptions on the average grade within my letter. They're probably pretty close, although not exact.
Could you just, as I asked the chief, I'd also like to ask you just to comment on the conditions on the site at the present time.
Conditions on the site at the present time?
What's there? If we have any public safety concerns? Because obviously you have some public safety concerns with this proposed design.
Well, the building that's there now is slated for demolition. The demolition, from my perspective, can't happen soon enough. I believe that existing building poses serious threats to public safety just by virtue of its existence. And we've been working, the selectmen, my office, Carrick Realty, we've been working pretty hard to try and, as you know, there are, part is owned by Carrick Realty, part is owned by the town, and it's a complex building. Its proximity to the T-tracks, its closeness to the streets and the sidewalk, the commuters. It's a difficult building to arrange a successful demolition. We've been trying to do this for 2 years now, and we're getting closer. But yes, that existing building currently is dangerous, in my opinion.
Thanks, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, Mr.
Guys,
Chairman.
you have any questions?
No, not at this time.
Joe, just so I can understand this, how is it that the town-owned parcel could be developed right up to the lot line? How-
Because it's in a business district, and you are allowed to go 0 feet from a sideline, 0 feet from a rear line.
Okay.
But you would have to build that as a party wall, what's called a party wall, which would mean essentially no windows. And that's more, that would be more conducive to an office use or an industrial use of some sort, not a resident, typically not a residential building.
Okay. Peter, did you have any questions for the building inspector?
Well, one you just asked, which was the fact that in the business district, that you can go right to the lot line. Number one. Number two, the fact is, what we're proposing is current and before the town, and we don't know what's going to happen with this permit, but we're presuming that something appropriate would be granted. And so whatever we build would therefore comply with whatever this permit is that's granted. And the fact that the town may or may not do something later with that parcel, you know, the other owner, be it the town or some subsequent purchaser, has to deal with the zoning bylaw and with the existence of our building. The other thing I would like to point out, and our architect Kurt Raber can explain further if I'm inaccurate, along the closer portion of the building that's at the corner of Central and Elliott, most of that area that abuts the town-owned parcel is not the residential part. I mean, it's all part of the residential building, but it's utility space, it's corridor space. So along, parallel, but at the back of that portion along Elliott Street, it's not the residential apartments themselves. There's some along the side where there is a little portion of the units, but by and large, it's not like it's all tons and tons of residential units along that portion, the two portions that abut the town parcel. So let me see, I made a few notes. I was going to hold on some things related to the fire chief's comments. But in terms of, so your comments, and I'll have to go over your letter more closely, which I'm sure the board will give us an opportunity to respond between now and the next hearing. So I don't want to say things off the cuff or ask things off the cuff. But in terms of building code itself, I don't think you've said that there are issues with the proposed construction.
I'm sorry?
In terms of the building code itself, I don't believe you've raised anything that is a concern from what you see as to the proposed construction. You're raising concern about the safety because of lack of access, as the fire chief has said.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Peter, while you're sort of on the spot, can you address just two quick issues for us? One is the square footage issue, and second, the average grade height issue, if you could. I mean, it does seem like they're sort of readily soluble, or at least
Sure.
you can give us the information.
Sure. Again, I'll give a quick synopsis, and then Chris McCarthy from Allen and Majors, our engineer, will elaborate or correct. So we do have the stamped surveyor's plan on the existing conditions plan. I guess you didn't see that, but we do have that as part of our submission. And so the various other takeoffs, both for buildings, which Kurt Raber, our architect, can speak to if necessary, and the other calculations that we've done related to square footages on the site, that's what Allen and Majors has used. So we don't believe that there's,
Peter, just a second, because I don't see where it is on the plan.
I think it was the
The square
fourth.
footage,
Yeah,
they do not list it on the survey, on the stamp survey. They do not list the square footage, is correct.
okay.
But it's a scale plan and it's stamped, the point is, and so that's what they're going off of. And plus the fact, if I heard correctly, which I guess is a question to you, Kathleen, is what you've seen so far, as I recollect, you saw a discrepancy that sounds like it might be under 1,000 square feet, 34,000 something
No, I think
versus?
it's over 1,000 square feet.
Okay, so it's in the
But
thousands?
there's yeah.
It's in the thousands?
It's not tens of thousands of
Right,
square feet.
okay. I mean, and I'm not trying to diminish it. I mean, obviously, I agree that accuracy is legit. But, Chris, can you expand on that?
Well, we also have the CAD file, and the lot closes, and it's 35,525 is what we have in that. I believe is on the assessor's data on the town website as well. But, we have the CAD file, and it closes, the line closes, and that's the areas that we have,
Okay.
which correlate, which on the survey, because we got the CAD file from Anderson.
So your number is 35,525 square.
525, right.
Okay.
It's common practice. That's the survey.
And,
Right,
and
yeah, I know.
Can you-
We
can you
still don't
addre-
have a survey, I mean, just because you have it on a CAD file doesn't mean I don't have a plan that certifies the square footage.
We will have to have Anderson add that to the plan.
I mean, it sounds like it's pretty easy to do.
Yeah, I mean, again, what Chris said is it's based on the survey. It's true that physically the words or the letters, square footage aren't there, but
You know, as a conveyancer, sorry, I'm one of those kind of people that if I get a plan, I want to know what the acreage is. Sorry about that.
And that's fair, but that's an easy problem
It's a question
to
of fact.
address.
yeah, well, yeah, I mean, we'll certainly take.
And how about the average grade issue?
Average grade, we did submit, I noted that it was said that we did not submit that. It is in the application, within the requested waiver section of the original application. And it's a little complex, I don't have the numbers, off the top of my head, but it's because the lot is in two different zones, residential zone and the commercial zone, that we had to take the average grade of the building and of the lot in those two zones. So there's two different heights. There's two average grade height, mean grade around the property, and to determine the building height around the face of the building. So we have that it's not diagrammed on the sections, but it's laid out there as to how much relief. We're not exceeding the allowed building height.
I mean, when we come back to the next session that Peter just alluded to, can you give us something that shows us that?
Sure. Sure, it's easy to add it to the section. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, does anyone else have anything for Mr. Prondak? Kathleen? Is Mr. Prondak okay?
Yeah.
Done? Okay.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
thank you. Well. I believe you have the letter from the police.
We do.
So what we've been doing is that I've just been introducing you, and then you get to say what you had put in your letter to the board, and then the board has the opportunity to respond to questions. And I have copies, if anybody needs it, of your letter of 20th.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. This is a first in my 30-year career before the zoning board of appeals.
There you go.
This is a very important night.
We are a very august body, there's no question about that.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Do you want your letter?
Yeah.
There you go.
So I did,
It's not a mistake.
I'll give you a little bit of history, just a little bit of personal background. My father worked at 36 Central Avenue, the former police station, and I remember that building as long as I could, from the time I could walk. I went to work in what was the Getty Station while I was in high school at age 15, and at 19, I walked 2 doors away when Fallon Ambulance moved into the former Milton Lincoln Mercury dealership, and I worked there until almost the time I came on this job in 1984. So the Central Ave Business District is something that I know very well. A little bit of just perspective, and I'm not an engineer, I'm not a zoning expert, just standing there and looking, and I was there again tonight. And anyone who's ever come before me, either in my role as the police chief or especially as chair of the Traffic Commission, traffic is a big issue in Milton. We are a community whose infrastructure was built many years ago, and it was built for people who worked in home, for the most part, middle-class working families who had 1 or 2 cars, most one. Most of our schools were built for children that walk to schools. If you go by any of them today, you see they're inundated with cars that pick up and drop off. And the Southeast Expressway was built for about 90,000 cars a day, and it's more than double that today. So traffic each and every day, and I believe I mentioned just one recent number on the Mattapan Bridge. Just the Mattapan Bridge, which is one of 5 of the only 6 ways out of Boston on any given day, carries almost 60,000 cars a day in volume. So traffic is something that, and John, who also sits on the Traffic Commission, is something we deal with every day. So just a little bit of perspective, if you stand at Central Ave and Elliott Street, and I know you've worked on this for a long time to try and come to both the town and the proposed developer here, the Conleys, to try and come to a development, is that if you stand there, and no matter what it was, whether it was Hendry's, whether the plate was Central Ave Deli, whether Esprit de Vin was Starlight Cleaners, Covert Drug, the Getty Station, even Clark and Fallon Ambulance, which was there for 20 years, which is now Steel and Rye, they've pretty much all stayed the same. The only one big change, if you look at it, is 36 Elliott, which you can tell, you don't have to stand at the intersection very long, you can tell that the architecture and the design is that it doesn't date back to the time of the other buildings. The one thing about this building, from just a layman's perspective, is it's 3 of those. It's 3 36 Elliots that you're going to put at this location, just in size. So that can kind of, from just a lay person, just kind of give you a conceptual visual what's there. So as to what's in my letter, the 2 big issues. Traffic is one, and volume is a major issue. Just standing there tonight, traffic was backed up consistently between 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock from the Central Avenue, just coming over the Central Avenue Bridge from Central and Elliott to River Street. And tonight was just a normal night, no hiccups. You know, the other night, there was a shooting on the Lower Mills section where we had to close Dorchester Avenue and Adams Street. Just one hiccup on one bridge completely just pushed double the pressure on the Central Ave Business District. So the first thought is, and I'm not putting this all on the developer, but this, you've got a 10-pound bag of potatoes, it's got 15 pounds of potatoes in it already, in simple terms. So if you're going to put this here, you're going to have to look at signalization of that intersection. It can't be 4 stop signs coming, give, take, much longer. And the building, as what was given to me to comment on, is right in the intersection. It's right there. You come out of the exit of the entrance, so they're in that design, you're right into the intersection. So that's the first one. And then the second one is obviously parking. The benefits and the development of the Central Ave Business District and the positives that come with it means more and more people coming there. As you know, the basement of the town side of that building years ago was a T-commuter lot. T-commuter parking along the Elliott Street corridor is something from an enforcement issue we deal with everywhere. That's just from T-commuters, not people just going to businesses. So parking there, whatever you do, whatever you approve, parking and signalization at that intersection are two things that you're going to have to consider. And I've read, some of the studies. I'm telling you from someone who's goes there every day, watches that intersection, and you can go there yourselves tonight, and you will see that it is the only unsignalized of the three main bridges coming in. So Adams Street and Elliott, signalized. Mattapan, signalized. Central Ave and Elliott, not signalized. So that's just, in a nutshell, and I don't want to take a lot of your time, but that's pretty much what you have to really consider here, looking at this.
We have nothing but time, Chief.
I wish I could say that.
We live for this, we really do. I just have a few questions for you.
Sure.
I deal with traffic issues in my practice of law all the time, so I have some familiarity. I understand 4-hour warrants and 8-hour warrants, but I know from literature I've read, not in connection with this case, but in other cases, that people sometimes say there's a law of unintended consequences when you put in traffic signals. You get as many problems as you solve. And have you had experience with that you can sort of relate to us?
To be honest with you, I've been chief for 7 years, and I can't think of the last two major signals that I recall, last three major signals. Two are DCR. They're both in the Parkway, which was the Parkway and Canton Avenue, which was a very similar stop sign, it had to be addressed. The second one is right out front here, Canton Highland, same thing, four-way stop. The volume was just too much, it had to be addressed. And the most recent one that's completed is Blue Hills Parkway at Brook Road. And even that now, which is part of the reason that the information that I provided for you on just on the daily flow on the Mattapan Bridge comes from Beta Group, who's doing a DCR project, and John can weigh in on this, on 138 Brush Hill and the Parkway, because the current existing infrastructure is just not enough for adequate flow. But I'll say this to you, if you didn't, in the answer to your question, direct answer, so if you left it as is, then what happens? Because the signalization is not just for vehicular traffic. It's becoming a busy business district for pedestrians. So signalization also includes safer pedestrian crossways, as you know. So that's just my thought, and I am not, John, no, I defer to John all the time when it comes to being my role as police chief is the enforcement aspect of it. But you can see it doesn't take much for a normal night, just one little hiccup, as I say, we had one last night, and you have gridlock. And part of the role of the police department and the traffic commission is to prevent gridlock in the town. And that's just what we have to try and do every day.
Do you have a sense of how, and I'm sure there's other people that can answer this question for me, I don't have a feel for how complicated it is to get all the approvals that you need to get in order to put a signal in. I assume Mass Highway wouldn't be involved in this.
No, would.
Okay.
We
So
do
that-
not, as a town.
Once you say that, then if you just go to the manual, which I
I
did
already-
today, on installing traffic signals, it's about 30 pages long, and it's a lawyer's dream, but it's gotta be a developer's nightmare. And it can take forever. I mean, you do the 5%, the 10%, the 20%, and all that kind of, so that's a problem. I mean, if I'm a developer. So do you have any sense of what the timeline is? From the time that you first talked about putting the signal in at the Parkway and Canton Avenue, and the time it was actually put in, how long?
I'll defer to John.
Well, that's a little bit of a different scenario, just because the Blue Hills Parkway is a DCR roadway, so
Sure.
ultimately there was another layer of approvals
Right.
that we had to go through.
Yeah,
But approximately a year and a half.
okay. And do either or both of you have a sense of what the cost is that's associated with that?
Oh, it's in excess of 100,000, I would think.
Easily,
Yeah.
easily.
Because I've seen estimates that range from 100 to 350, and I don't know how you get from one to the other, but I'm just trying to get a sense of the magnitude of the cost of something like this.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly depends on the complexity of the
Exactly
intersection
right.
and the amount of hardware and everything else that needs to be installed, but, you know, off the cuff,
At least 100.
yeah.
Yeah,
probably
I haven't,
closer to
I haven't seen
3.
anything less than that.
Mm.
I think it's been like 150, sort of the working number for that kind of an intersection, because it is only sort of two-lane roadways, so, in my experience, that's sort of what they've kind of run.
I'll give you one estimate. We dealt with one proposal. We considered moving because as you know, we've redone all our schools. And the PS, which was a high school, was now a middle school. And we did look at the possibility of putting, the flashing school zone lights into that zone. And it was like, just the 20 mile an hour, it was like $85,000, and that was 5 years ago. It's not cheap, and I agree with John, obviously it's the a la carte, what you have to put in there, how much you add. But, and I'm not saying that I'm putting this all on this project, but you're adding so many things here that, as I say, you've got 15 pounds of potatoes already in a 10-pound bag. It has to start to be addressed, it has to be looked at.
Any other questions?
I guess I'd like to hear Chief Wells, I think you indicated that you read the technical memoranda, or you may have read some of them from the traffic, from Mr. Gillen, and
Yeah, so I read that one of the comments was about parking, about part of the gridlock, or the congestion coming from cars maneuvering into park and pedestrians crossing. Clearly, the maneuvering into park, I haven't seen that at all. And the pedestrians crossing, clearly during the day, on weekdays, it can be busier. But pedestrians crossing, as I said, just from a layman's point of view, doesn't back traffic up to River Street all the way up to Star Market. It's flow and volume. While we haven't done a number, and I'll give you just a simple term. I've asked, when we got the numbers on the Mattapan Bridge, which was, what, a month? Maybe 6 weeks we've had those numbers from Beta. I've probably asked 25 people in town, from members of the Board of Selectmen to other police officers to other citizens, people concerned. What do you think roughly we carry on the Mattapan Bridge a day? The highest number I got, the average number I got was 5,000. The highest number anyone guessed was 25,000. It's 60,000. So we don't even, this study that I said doesn't even have any numbers, true quantitative numbers. I'm not sure what comes over. I don't think it's 60, but I'd be very interested to see what comes over the Central Ave Bridge. One thing that we understand from a traffic commission about Elliott Street is the Elliott Street corridor from Adams to Blue Hills Parkway is a parallel alternative to River Street between Lower Mills at Baker Chocolate, beyond Mattapan Square all the way to Reedville. Because if you take Elliott Street from Adams and Elliott, you can traverse Elliott all the way. You just have to jump the Parkway. You're on to Brush Hill Road, Truman, and then you're right into Reedville with minimal congestion compared to if you took the River Street the whole way. So that one aspect alone causes a great deal of daily traffic on Elliott Street. And if you ask any of the residents of Elliott Street, we hear it all the time. Anytime we have a traffic commission meeting and we talk about traffic issues in a neighborhood, a specific neighborhood, they pack the room. Most people, the one misnomer for most people in this community is they complain to us constantly about speed. Speed really isn't an issue on most streets. It's mostly 90 to 95% of most vehicular traffic falls within the normal, the posted speed limit. But volume is a different story. Just think of a piece of Swiss cheese, and you trap water, think of pouring water over it, and all that water just being cars, and the piece of Swiss cheese being our town. They're just trying to find a way to get through. We are a daily commute south of Boston, and there's no other way about it. And Elliott Street and Central Avenue is a major intersection that plays a big role in that.
And one other point that's made there that I'd just like to hear your perspective on, if I could, is it says the existing crash rate's very low at this intersection, and new signals often introduce rear-end type crashes that previously did not exist.
I didn't say that.
No,
I
this
didn't
was in the
say that.
this was in the
I didn't say
technical
that.
memorandum. No, I was
I
asking for your perspective on that.
I didn't look at that, but I know I would not agree with that. I mean, driver error is usually the cause of a rear-end accident. a person who's involved in a rear end accident is usually caused by inattention on the part of the driver that hits the car in front of them. In 99% of accidents that are investigated by us, the person who gets hit in the rear end is found at fault. If they're cited, if you're an insured in the Commonwealth and you are hit from the rear end, the person who hits you is found at fault. So I wouldn't call a set of lights the cause of the accident there.
Thank you.
Just if we could, the parking issue is also obviously a major issue component here. What's the parking situation there from your perspective, as it exists today?
I wouldn't put, I'm not going to use, I'll use there as an example, I'll use the whole town. Parking is an issue in our community in that, and as you see, obviously you've dealt with the East Milton issue, and the newest East Milton project is to add parking to the business district. So parking is an issue in that, as I said when I first get in here, if you take a house that 40 years ago in this community had one car, you know, today they have 3, 4, and 5. You know, 20 years ago, we didn't have a hardship parking plan in town because very few people had enough cars that they needed overflow parking onto a street. So the one thing that I have said to the selectmen, and I've only said it in this, and I put in this letter, and obviously you've addressed it as well, is that you're going to have to look at parking somehow because, as I said, you're filling that bag of potatoes. And just one recent meeting we had on an issue on Brook Hill Road, which is one of the first streets, when you cross that intersection on Central, heading, on Elliott, heading towards the village, Brook Hill's the first street on the right, and I think there's probably 15 spaces there, John, 15, 18 spaces? For either restricted parking or service zone parking, which is what we designate for employees of a specific business district, and those spaces are full all the time. And the other thing, and the last reason that I did address this, is that there's very little parking on Elliott Street, and I think I mentioned that to begin with. I believe this proposal removes, if not all of it, the majority of it.
And there's no overnight parking.
No. So let me talk about how overnight parking, because I've heard that, I've been asked, Mr. Clark has asked me that question. We do have a hardship parking criteria system. You can apply for a hardship parking permit. The way that we give them is, many of them go on 2 families. And one of the sadder things that's happening is you'll have a landlord who owns a 2-family who rents, say, to a young couple. And the young couple moves in, and then once they're in, they say, oh, by the way, the driveway's mine. They park out on the street, they think they're okay, and then within a short period of time, they come up one morning, and because we have restricted all-night parking, they find that they've been tagged for all-night parking. So then people come in and they think it's just an automatic. We don't have nighttime parking. We have a hardship parking system where we review the situation, the location, and the area, and then we either approve or disapprove a permit or permits for a specific location. They're given on an annual basis. But I'm probably more restrictive than the selectmen want me to be, but I have to be, because if we did not have it, it goes back to the gridlock and congestion, we have severe winters here. You wouldn't be able to plow, you wouldn't be able to move public safety through your fire apparatus through the streets, so we do scrutinize it pretty significantly when we do. I do not see anything, and I'll be honest with you, and I know that the ratio is like 1.1 in this building. I don't know you could even apply hardship parking to this, because I don't know where you'd put it. Because hardship parking usually applies to a person who lives at, say, 372 Canton Ave. I need permission to park in front of my house. And that's how, it's not like you go at 372 Canton Ave, we give you the permission to park on Morton Road. It doesn't work like that. It usually applies to in front of your home. And that is always, many times, a disqualifier, because there may not be the ability to park in front of a home. And again, if you look at the proposal here, you're taking away on-street parking. I don't know how you could apply hardship parking in any way in this area as it's currently laid out.
Any other questions, Frank?
No, no questions.
Peter, do you have any questions?
Thank you. A couple of questions or comments, the chief and John. And then I would like the opportunity for Jack Gillen to respond or ask questions, as well as presumably
Yeah, that's
Jennifer.
fine.
Yeah, thank you. First, just in terms of the existing situation, everything you said is premised on the existing situation, which I understand. And then there was talk earlier mostly about the town-owned parcel, but I believe there's some town parking on the non-building part of that parcel. But if there's an existing parking problem, couldn't the town use that space that they're talking about for parking?
There's no parking on any parcel there that
No,
I
when the
know of.
building comes down. When the building comes down, if the existing situation merits addressing parking, that could be used by the town for parking.
There's no present plan to do that.
I've seen no plan for that either.
Okay,
No one's
okay.
said that to
I'm
me,
just
but-
we're dealing with an
No.
existing situation, and there's no present plan. Okay, thank you. Next, and I'll premise this by saying I'm not 100% sure that I have the facts right, but recently or currently, I think it's called a Mass Works grant, $1 million to the town for street improvements in this area. As I understand it, it relates to things, or is being used for things like the sidewalk kicking out and things like that. But again, an existing problem, the town didn't choose to use that money for putting in a traffic signal, is that correct?
To my knowledge, that money cannot be used for traffic signals.
As it's currently designated, but you could have asked for it.
Not under that particular grant program.
Okay, but there's $1 million that isn't being used for traffic signalization, right?
Yeah, it's a business development and streetscape improvement type of grant,
Yep.
so again, it wouldn't be available for
Okay.
traffic signals.
And
Yeah,
ju-
yeah,
Can I-
Chief has something to add to that.
Can I just comment on that?
Sure.
I did ask this question when the Sullivan proposal went through, or the first map, when it was done on the Central Ave, there was a grant on the Central, on the Milton Village side, and as John's correct, that grant would not allow for that, because we have had this discussion previously, I'm not gonna deny that,
Sure.
say that. I mean, what I said about the enhancement and the growth of that district is true. It's
No, I appreciate that. Jack, I think right now, whether you want to ask questions or comment on what's been said, and certainly that can elicit a response from Jennifer or the chief or anybody, so, Jack?
You want to do it? Chief, can I ask you just one last question? In your view, is a traffic signal warranted today under existing conditions?
If we had the money, I would say to you, we definitely should do a study to see if it's warranted. I don't have the expertise on my own to make that decision, but I would definitely say if we had the money, and the chair of the Board of Selectmen, we talked about this a little
Yeah,
in a
right.
meeting with you just recently, that it definitely, it warrants a study to see if it's warranted.
Probably on the bubble, you know.
I would say yes.
In the bubble, in the sense that
That,
it
you know,
doesn't
it's-
make 8, but it makes 4, all
That,
warrant?
it just that it's probably pretty close to the situation, even without this project, that there'd be enough.
Has there been any effort or plan of the town to study that irrespective of this proposal?
I'll be honest with you, as chair of the Traffic Commission, I mean, this is the second or third possible, there was an initial proposal that was on the table when I first became chief. Then there was a discussion about another mixed use that may have come forward, which I have not seen, and then I've only commented on what's been presented to me and asked to comment on, but clearly, we've had discussions about the enhancement and growth of the Central Ave Business District, about looking at that.
Okay.
Because it is the only, one, so if you take the three big ones, Central, Mattapan, and Adams, it's the only one that's not signalized. And Adams was completely redone it was a joint Boston-Milton project where they completely rebuilt that bridge and redid the lights on both sides, both the Dorchester side and the Milton side of that bridge.
When they built or proposed to build a new apartment complex on Elliott Street, like up from, at the Milton Hill House, was traffic studied in conjunction with that? And was it recommended to the developer that they consider a traffic signalization at that intersection?
I don't recall seeing a traffic study for that development.
I can say this, as far as their parking situation, we've never had to deal with them, they've never had to come before us with any parking issue with on-street parking. They've always had adequate space. The one difference that I would say to you between that building and this building, is that building is not on this intersection. As I said, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a developer, but if you take any layperson, just stand at Central and Elliott, at any one of the four corners, just look at 36, take 3 of them, put them in the opposite corner, and say to yourself, okay, how's that gonna go?
The reason I asked the question, and I'll ask you the same about Steel and Ride, did anybody suggest to Steel and Ride that they do a traffic study, or that they put in a signal? And let me tell you why I asked these questions. Because let's just say we denied this permit because of traffic issues. Well, knowing Peter Freeman as I do, he's gonna go to the Housing Appeals Committee. And I can tell you from experience with the Housing Appeals Committee, that they don't look kindly on situations where private commercial developments have been allowed to go forward, and then suddenly when a 40B comes up, all of a sudden it's a traffic issue. And I can tell you, because I represented the developers in Canton who are doing the 40B project, and Canton said, oh, God, you can't put this in. Have you seen the traffic at 138 and in Randolph Avenue? And it was huge. It was a level of service F, and we were going to add just that many more. And we got to the Housing Appeals Committee, because I represented the successful developer in that case. Housing Appeals Committee said, parks on all your houses. You haven't done a darn thing about this problem, and you're not going to put it on the back of the 40B development. So that's my concern. I mean, I'm just being honest about this.
So let me give you an honest answer.
Has anybody ever said to anybody else, you really ought to do a traffic signal warrant there?
So let's use Steel and, so we brought Steel and Ride before us, even though they're a nighttime operation. You know, they're only open from 5 until midnight each night. So Steel and Ride, there's no limited daytime use. It's mostly night parking. So one of the things that was brought up, and now I believe there's actually going to be a bylaw created for, was they came to us with a plan for valet parking, which we felt was adequate. As far as complaint, and so we said we'd review it. I said I would review it. We've had minimal issues from Steel and Ride, minimal. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form, either as police chief, chairman of the traffic commissioner, or as a resident, trying to put this all on the back of a 40B development. I understand the benefits to that as far as the pros, the cons, the public. You know, where the town is in this, the T station being right there, bat line, T, I understand all that. I'm just saying, as police chief, I wouldn't be doing my own due diligence by not making the comments, given the size and the complexity of what you're proposing to put, not up on Milton Hill away from the intersection, not in a proposal that already has, not in a business that's only at night. You're talking about a residential complex dead smack in this intersection. I would be remiss in my job as police chief to not make these comments.
I appreciate that, I really do. Any other questions, or Mr. Gillen, did you?
No, I'm gonna wait until you call on me.
Okay, all right. All right, that's fine.
I don't
Why
wanna raise my hand.
why don't you put on your, is the chief done? Have you-
I'm
Feel free to add.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No, I'd like him to stay for Jack, that's,
I'll just sit back. Jack,
Yeah.
I'll be here.
either way, no, you're certainly welcome to.
I know Mr.
the
Gillen.
chief.
We know each other.
Thank you. Jack?
Okay.
Yeah, well, just to bring the board up, some people know and some people don't. When we had left here last time, I think you had asked for new traffic counts. There's accounts that I had taken were back in 2011. And what I had done at that time was I had projected the 11 counts through a normal growth factor to bring it up to 2014, and then I used that normal growth factor again to go another 5 years out to 2019. Well, we made projections based on inflating. And when you use a constant for your factor, you use that for both the through movements and the turn movements and everything else. So you end up with a picture of what it might look like in 8 years, I guess it is. But it doesn't mean that that's exactly what it's going to be. So what you would ask me to do was to go out and take new traffic counts. So we did that. We put machines down on Central Avenue, right at the bridge, 6,000 cars a day. So that was the question, is how many cars does Central Avenue carry per day? And we got the machines down, and we were out in bi-direction down there, and also up at Elliott Street, a little bit further away from the intersection so that we could, they wouldn't be disturbed up there. And then we counted the intersection itself, Central at Elliott, all of the movements from 7 to 9 in the morning, and then from 4 until 6 in the afternoon. and we counted in 15-minute increments. So every 15 minutes, we knew what the volumes were. And then we put the highest consecutive 4 15-minute periods together, and that was a peak hour. So then what I did is I took that peak hour, and now I know what we have in 2014. So I just took those numbers and inflated them by that normal growth up to 219, and then I added the traffic that I had signed from the Milton Hill House, which I did do the traffic study for. So I knew how I just had to sign that earlier, and everything looks like it's copacetic, so we added that on. And we did the capacity calcs again, and it looks like we have the same incremental impact on the intersection as we had previously, although the volumes themselves are lower under the projected 2019 than the last time I was here, when I had inflated everything to the year 2019. So we have better numbers now, but that did come out lower than the 2011, pumped all the way up to 2019. So the impact was relatively the same, I think. I'm going to let, your consultant also speak, I hope. But, and then we looked at the traffic signal warrants, and I didn't see any of the warrants, one